One of the highlights of the 2019 Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance is the celebration of Ferrari's 90 years. Now, if you know anything about cars, you know that Ferrari, as a car builder, started after the war. So, Paul, how do we get a 90-year celebration?
It's stretching the point a bit, if I'm honest, but we've all seen those pictures of the pre-war Alfa Romeos with what we now know as the Ferrari logo on the front of them. The cavallino rampante, as they say in Italian, the prancing horse. And that's because Enzo Ferrari, I mean, we always think of him as the grey-haired man with the dark glasses, the commendatore, but he wasn't always that. He was a driver, he was a racer, and then latterly he ran the factory team of Alfa Romeos. So I think that's how they've got to that point of it being 90 years.
And here is one of those Alfa Romeos that Enzo Ferrari used to cut his racing teeth, for lack of a better term. It's an Alfa Romeo 8C, Paul.
It is, and Enzo Ferrari actually drove these, as well as creating what became the Ferrari team and then the marque. And you can see on the front of this car the CFAC Ferrari signs, the Cavallino Rampante, and that was the very beginnings of the Ferrari team and everything else. Looking at this car, fabulous. I got a big lump in my throat just now when I looked in there, and this has a central accelerator pedal. So can you imagine here in 2019 having to drive that either on a road or on a track with a central pedal?
That's frightening. Just the thought of it is more frightening than I want to deal with.
One of the things here, of course, is that because of the style of cars in the period, we have these cycle-type wings on the front, which meant that you could take them off, and it was a Grand Prix car to all intents and purposes. But then later on, what you could do is stick those back on, either drive the car home, or alternatively, you could go sports car racing as well. So it was very, very different from what we know now. Dark red, of course, which still is the Alfa Romeo racing colour. Dark red rather than the blood red that Ferrari later adopted, but very much an Alfa Romeo through and through. It looks the part just standing still.
And this isn't the only one of those cars here on the field. There's another one we can go take a look at.
And this is that car. It's an Alfa Romeo Tipo B, the P3. I'm here with Fred Russell, who is the man who has, I'm not sure whether it's the pleasure or the responsibility, Fred, to look after this car.
Luckily, it is the pleasure. Always pleasure on these things.
Now, these cars were hugely successful in period, weren't they?
Right, they were. They're incredibly dominant in every race they entered, there was only a few of these made. They all raced in the Grand Prix style racing, with the exception of one. One was also modified to be a street car, raced in some of the Targa Florios and things like the Mille Miglia, where it won the Mille Miglia. This one spent its entire life as a Grand Prix car.
And some of the races it did?
Well, this did the most significant race as far as I'm concerned. In 1934, Hitler was very angry at the fact that the Germans did not win the Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. So he invested a huge amount of money to create the Silver Arrows, the Mercedes, the auto unions. Well, in 1935, with those cars entered on the field at the Nürburgring, Tazio Nuvolari showed up with this one-year-old 300 horsepower car to do battle with those 400 horsepower Silver Arrows.
And this is that car?
This is that car.
Now, every petrol head in the world has seen the photographs, and some have seen some of those really scratchy video pieces of that event, and this was actually the car.
This is the car. And, it was a tough fight to win that race because, obviously 300 horsepower. But one of the joys is that back then, all that German money bought some phenomenal cars, but they did not improve the tire technology. So in that 1 year, the tire technology had not improved. The tires on this matched perfectly to the horsepower, perfectly to the weight, perfectly to the driver. So he was able to drive this car and stay up there. And when the white flag came out, he was in second place with only von Brauchitsch ahead of him. And at that point, he only had 12 miles to go, and he made the pass. He crossed that finish line in the lead, won that race.
Much to the annoyance, I think, of the powers that be.
Exactly. This car then sat out for the next year or so. It didn't really race, but then it got into the hands of other people, and it raced for quite a few years, and then kind of enjoyed being a sporting racer all the way up through the 50s, and then luckily fell into the hands of historical-minded folks who then put everything back together perfectly, and we now have the car.
And where does it live now?
Now it resides up in the Bellevue, Washington area. However, it's if you look at the stickers all over the window, you realize we vintage race this on a regular basis. So it's been out vintage racing a couple times this year. In fact, we would have been at Laguna Seca right now if it wasn't for the request to be here on the lawn.
That's one hell of a decision to have to make.
Yeah, it's a tough choice, but you know, every once in a while we can sit one out.
And this is a joy to see this, and I was getting goosebumps on my arms just seeing it earlier on. Now I know it's history.
It's great.
It just blows me away.
Fun.
Thank you so much for bringing it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
This is a special car. On the side we have Brian Redman and Ottaro Mazzario's name. Tremendous characters, both of whom are involved with racing still, and we saw Brian Redman out at Laguna Seca this weekend. This car is a 312 PB. People often talk about Formula One cars with bodywork. This is it. This was straight out of the Formula One stable. It had the flat 12 engine. It had a top speed of about 320 kilometers per hour. Very quick. It was an absolute winner everywhere it went. But over the years, they developed that into a different kind of car, and Jim Roller has found its younger brother.
Younger brother is right, Paul. In 1994, this Ferrari 333 SP changed the face of sports prototype racing around the world. It made its debut in the third race of the 1994 IMSA series. I was lucky enough to actually be at the first test for the car at Road Atlanta, and the buzz around Ferrari returning to sports car racing in 1994 was absolutely off the charts. This car, the 1999 model, has some upgrades on it. It is a V12, of course, as all the Ferrari sports cars were, but this model, the 333 SP, brought Ferrari back to the hallowed ground of sports car racing after a long absence, and it really did alter the landscape for sports prototype racing throughout the world.
I've just come across this, one of my favorite Ferraris, for all sorts of personal reasons. First time I ever went to Le Mans was in 1979, and this was one of the cars. It's very loosely based on the 512 Berlinetta Boxer. It's got the engine in the same place, it's got the same middle bit, but besides that, it is an out-and-out race car. Very, very rare to see one of those cars, and then you move on, and what's next? Another one. That's quite something to see, just two of these. Both of these are Le Mans cars and very much of their time. People talk about the GTO. The GTO from 1962. This is the 288 GTO, which was something which was built for the market generally, and then we come up to the 360 GT. Production car, of course, but built by Ferrari, or Ferrari's people, for a race car, and I think a car that was on so many boys' bedroom walls back in the times of the early 90s, this 1992 Ferrari F40. Something that's going to float my boat very much as a historic race car is this gorgeous Ferrari 250 Testa Rossa. We know that the Testa Rossa, Italian for red head, Testa Rossa, and that was because the heads on the engine itself were painted red crackle finish. So Testa Rossa, the beautiful car that we see here, reupholstered now and ready to rock, but a racing car in its day. And then we come, of course, to what many people would see as the ultimate Ferrari, the 250 GTO. Two of them on the lawn, side by side, here at Pebble Beach. It was introduced in 1962. Only ran actually for 2 years before they redid it and recreated the car with a different body, the GTO 64. I think most people would say that the second body was not anywhere near as pretty as the first. This is perfection. This is everything that it should be, and to have two of them side by side is an absolute treat.
These are both Ferrari 488s. One is a GTE model, the other is a GT3 model. Basically the same car, but for totally different uses. This is the car that was run by Ben Keating at Le Mans in the GTE AM category. The white WeatherTech car is Cooper McNeil's car from the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship that runs in the GTD or GT Daytona category. Both of these cars are relatively the same, only some small tweaks. Cosmetically, they are exactly the same.
I find it hard to believe that as we walk around this lawn, we see this car, which is the F300 Formula One car, very much in the current flavour of what Formula One looks about. But this, believe it or not, is a 1998 car. It's 21 years old. Doesn't look like that to me. It is decked out in much more modern sponsorship colours than it would have had in period, which is okay, we don't mind that. But it has all the finery of all the gadgets on the steering wheel here. Very much a more up-to-date kind of car in every sense. This, of course, had the V10 engine behind it, so we're not going to get it fired up today, but that is an absolutely glorious noise from the heyday of very, very noisy Formula One cars. We come over and look at some of the older cars here. Some of them are competition cars. All of them are competition cars in this row. And we have the 412S. You can see the evolution of the car coming on here. 1958, beginning to see that beginning of how the cars would have been. The fared-in headrest behind. And then we come down here to the Ferrari 365 Daytona. It was never called the Daytona properly by the Ferrari factory. That was almost a nickname, and they then adopted it after that. The 365 here, one of the very few cars that was actually built as a competition car. Big V12 in the front, a road developed kind of car, but very effective nonetheless. Beginning to see here the cam tail, the spoilers, because cars were now going sufficiently fast that keeping them in one piece and on the road was important. Now this is a lovely but very important car, because this is the 330 LM. It was an evolution of the 250 GTO, which had come just before that, and that we saw the 250 GTO being pretty successful, but was beginning to run out of steam by 1963, a year after its introduction. This is a bigger car, as you can see, the 330 LM, with the famous North American Racing Team logo on the side, the Luigi Chinetti car, and that this car ran at Le Mans again. With you can see the heritage, you can see the parentage of this car quite easily, but it's not a GTO, it is a 330 LM. Looking through then the 250 GT Berlinetta here, very much you can see designed as a road car. You can see the heritage there. This has been built in period as a race car, but nonetheless beautifully done. The interior, just the layout, the lines ready to pounce. And then we walk up through this glorious Pebble Beach lawn to this unusual to see a grey Ferrari, certainly in this period. This is a 1956 car, and this is the very early 250 GT. So we saw just now the 250 GT Berlinetta, and this is kind of the road-going version of it.
When your car is in a field of significant Ferraris, and you say this is one of the most significant Ferraris on the field, you better have the facts to back it up. And this is one of those significant cars. It's listed as a 1954 250 Monza, but in fact the car has a lot more history than that. It was raced successfully from 54 to 57 in Europe. Then the car was imported to the United States by Luigi Canetti, thus the white paint scheme with the blue stripe. Those are the colors of NART, the North American racing teams, and you can see the logo on the back of the car. Why is it significant that this car is here on display in this 90th anniversary of Ferrari Display? Yesterday, this car was on the auction block at Mecum Auctions.
The bidding on the car was spirited, but unfortunately it stopped short of the reported $22 million reserve. That means this Ferrari won't be finding a new home.